I'm not entirely certain if I should apologize for the clickbait, but here we go. May is Mental Health Awareness Month, and I have a story to tell you. I initially made this video I think it was exactly a year ago, right when the Stop Institutionalized Child Abuse Act was being put forth in Congress. I have a lot more subscribers now, and a curious incident of a dog in the pool occurred 2 days ago, and it was quite an incident. So I'm going to tell you the story about how my dog died and why the death of the dog is a huge relief. Roll the intro. I've got Finn here with me, and his roommate is kind of jealous, and so if you hear like background noise, that's what that is. But he just doesn't sit still enough for videos, so that's his problem, not ours, right, Finn? Yeah. Okay. Anyway, I got a call 2 days ago at 10:06 p.m. from my dad, and his voice was very sullen, and the first thing he says was, "I have to tell you something." And I knew it wasn't going to be good news. So my first thought was my uncle, who is currently suffering from throat cancer, had died, so I got really scared. But he said somebody had let the dog, which is a blind Chihuahua, probably my autistic brother who has severe autism, probably let her out to go to the bathroom, and since she was blind, she somehow wandered into the pool at my parents' house and drowned. This is a pretty awful way to go, and I feel sorry for the dog. I feel a little bit sorry for my mom, who was the one. Okay, yes, I feel sorry for my mom because she was the one who found the dog floating on her side in the pool. I feel sorry for my dad, and I feel sorry for my brother, who doesn't really understand that he essentially killed the dog. And I feel sorry for my sister. It was my sister's dog, not really my dog. But I had to take care of it, which we'll get into. So, this dog was the worst dog ever. It was a ratty little Chihuahua that was 15 years old, at this point was totally blind and only had 2 teeth. She was on borrowed time. So, in my first video I filmed about institutionalized child abuse, I mentioned that I have severe mental health problems, and I do. And I think people who interact with me probably see some little slivers of my mental illness sort of coming through every now and then. But for the most part, I live by myself, I pay my own bills, I pay my own rent, I take care of my own pets. I'm a fully functioning adult, I have a full-time job. But every now and then, a comment or a behavior will kind of slip through, and I can sort of see people being like, where the hell did that come from? Well, it comes from my bipolar, ADHD, and nonverbal learning disorder, which is similar to autism, the only difference being that autism is a full-on sensory experience and nonverbal learning disorder is just a visual experience. Chris Rock actually has it, interestingly enough. I didn't know that until he got assaulted by Will Smith. Anyway, I was diagnosed with bipolar when I was 13. I got sent to a psychiatric hospital outside of Fort Worth, which was a great hospital, and they put me on some medication, and I got a little bit better. The medication zonked me out really bad. It turned me into a zombie. It was a really powerful antipsychotic, which I no longer take, thankfully. And I ended up back in that hospital a few times, but I was there twice when I was 13, once when I was 15, once when I was 16. But in between the first 2 stays and the last 2 stays, I was at a reform school, heavily evangelical Christian reform school, where I suffered some awful abuse. Now, I don't have a script for this video, so I'm kind of just recalling stuff off the top of my head. It does kind of look sort of dark in here to me, but I think to you it looks pretty bright. It's storming really bad. It's May in Texas, and my migraines kind of get set off when the weather is dreary like this. So I actually had to take an Imitrex injection, and I'm not really thinking. I'm a little hazy. I'm about as hazy as it is outside. So I lived in two what we called units at this group home, reform school, children's home, residential treatment center. It really was a reform school, but to like make it sound easier because I lived there, I will oftentimes say group home or boarding school. It was pitched to my parents as a boarding school. My parents are very wealthy and they were kind of taken advantage of for their money. So if you hear me say group home, boarding school, reform school, it's all referring to the same place, Happy Hill Farm. You've probably heard of, if you're in the know about this, you've probably heard of Casa by the Sea, Provo Canyon School, a couple others. It's similar to that, they're just not as big, and they do a really good job of keeping news inside. So while I was there, they had a doctor, and this lovely doctor left a signed prescription pad for the nurse, just full pad full of doctor signatures, and the nurse just so lovingly put down medication without, meeting the kids. She was not licensed to do this. She was an RN. She was not a nurse practitioner, and it doesn't even matter because she shouldn't have been giving prescriptions that were signed by someone other than herself. So if you've heard about Happy Hill, that's probably what you've heard of. And there was also something going on where they refused to pay the coordinators, or what they were called, but they're basically house parents, overtime. So the first unit I lived in, Unit 7, I had no problems with abuse from the house parents. I was bullied. I was a freshman. She was a senior named Cambria. Cambria, I remember you. She had a twin brother named Cody, so it was Cody and Cambria, kind of like the band. Coheed and Cambria is a thing. So I lived there, no abuse. I got moved because I had requested to move because I was tired of this Cambria girl. I got moved to Unit 2. This is where the abuse occurred. I was abused by a coordinator. While I was there, I was very zonked out on medication, and we had chores, like military chores on steroids. So I would always fall asleep, and that was my thing. I would fall asleep in the middle of folding clothes. I would fall asleep in the middle of class. I would fall asleep while I was serving time. Let's talk about time. Time was when you would do something wrong. So if you got angry, cussed at your coordinator, they'd be like, all right, that's a 60, which basically means you have to sit in timeout at your desk and read, write, and draw for 60 minutes. No big deal, right? So we would get a 30 if we did something like more of a minor offense. Like I don't even know what a 30 would be because I didn't get very many of them. I got 60s and I got days and weeks. So a day of time is 5 hours on a weekday, 7 hours on a weekend. So I spent the majority of my time at this place basically in solitary confinement, at my desk, reading usually, sometimes writing, and you think, that doesn't sound that bad. Well, I only got to talk to my parents once a week on the phone. Our letters were actually read by the coordinators before they were sent out. So my parents had no idea what was going on at this place. And this place was very religious. They would tell me that, oh, it's just sin, you need Jesus. And it was like evangelical idiots who didn't believe in evolution and just didn't listen, and it was bad. So because I was falling asleep all the time and I had some social problems due to my mental illness and also the powerful medication, which was not helping things, I ended up with days and days of time. While all my friends were sitting off, having fun, watching movies, playing games, board games, because we weren't allowed electronics, because we weren't really allowed to communicate with anybody outside the farm, which is the colloquial jargon for the place. So we weren't allowed to communicate with people outside the farm. And my mom knew about the chores, which were very traumatizing to me because I kept falling asleep during the chores. The coordinator would come in and yell at me. I had to have my showers supervised because I kept making suicide threats because I knew that would get their attention. Because a girl, while they weren't paying attention, actually hanged herself in her closet. So yeah, real safe place for teenagers. No. And I actually know several people who have either overdosed or committed suicide after leaving the farm. So, yeah, this was not a good place to rehabilitate teenagers. The troubled teen industry is pretty messed up. My mom knew about the chores, and I think my mom just wanted another dog. So, my sister, who I have a lot of resentment towards, which I mean isn't really her fault, she has no medical issues. She isn't as smart as me, but because of her not having problems, she's always made better grades. She's never had behavior problems. And my loving mother kind of mimicked the chores. So for a week, my sister made her bed, um, I don't know, swept the floor, I guess. And at the end, she got a little Chihuahua puppy while I was getting abused doing the same stuff. And I met the dog. She was about the size of Finn right here, but not as chunky, maybe even a little shorter. I liked her. It was okay. I didn't live with her. And we go back to the farm at this point where I am literally starving. You can't tell that now, but I wasn't allowed to eat nutritious food because it turns out I have lots of stomach problems, which we didn't know at the time. And the food would make me sick. So I wasn't allowed to eat like snacks because our food was very controlled. Food deprivation was also a form of punishment along with extreme exercise. Um, because I kept falling asleep in class, but I also played sports. I was really, really athletic and I made the farm look good. So despite the behavior problems, I got to play sports and got to impress people outside the farm. So I would serve my detention that I got for sleeping in athletics. And I got to do burpees. Burpees is where you jump up and then you come down to a squat, you push your legs out, come back up to a squat and jump. I'll insert what it looks like. I had so many of those. I probably had at one point 500 to do, and it just wasn't possible to do them during the 2.5 hours we had athletics. So I would just do it for an hour, I'd miss the warm up, and then I'd go join practice. And that was pretty intense. I actually had really severe blisters. You probably can't see the scars. I don't know. You can kind of see them. They're up here. You can kind of see the scars, but we would wrap our hands in toilet paper because the blisters were so bad. And there was actually a recent story in the news about a town that borders my town that I live in now, where a coach was actually recently put on leave because he made his students do bear crawls on AstroTurf and they got horrible blisters. I think I'll put an image in of what her blisters looked like. It was very similar to what mine looked like, except mine were on the top and hers are on the bottom. Um, yeah. So that happened. And I also had to have my showers supervised, where the coordinator had to go in and sit in the bathroom while I was showering and watch me wipe myself down to make sure that I wouldn't hang myself with a towel. Because of this girl who had killed herself, I knew that that would be attention grabbing and maybe I could get out that way. And that's essentially how I got out of the farm. I just kept threatening to kill myself, and they were like, "You're too much of a liability, you can't stay here." So I went to the mental hospital. And then when I was 16, I went to a long-term mental hospital where they just completely overhauled my medication, and I was stabilized. I did have to go to a hospital when I was 20 because of some sleeping issues, but that was 10 years ago, and I am hospital free for 10 years. So since I'm 13, 10 years is actually the longest I've ever gone without staying in a mental hospital. So small victories. Um, Back to the dog. Every time I saw that dog, I was reminded of the abuse I experienced at the farm. I was reminded of the hunger pains, the being misunderstood when I tried to say, "Hey, I'm not sinning. I'm really sick and I have a doctor and I want to go see my psychiatrist because he understands me." And they were like, "No, you have to see Nurse Grace or you have to see the doctor here." So every time I saw that little chihuahua, that's what I was reminded of. And every time I tried to tell my mom, "This is why I don't like your dog," she just didn't want to listen. And that was really painful. So remember I said this dog is like the worst dog ever. So this dog would use my room as a litter box. She used to tear up my stuff. And I also have facet joint arthritis in my lower back. And so to keep the dog out of my room, my parents put this giant gate up in front of my room because that dog had, for some reason, chosen that room to pee and poop and destroy my stuff. So there was this giant gate, like really high, like a high gate for a tiny dog, that I had to step over every time I wanted to get in and out of my room. And it was really painful. So every time I wanted to get in and out of my room, again, I was reminded of the abuse, of the people lying to my parents, who I feel very sorry for. They didn't know all the stuff that was going on. They had no idea, because everything was so censored. So I feel sorry for my parents there because they were lied to. But that's one of the reasons I didn't like that dog. She peed on my phone once, actually. She peed on my phone. She urinated on my phone. And she was too stupid to be potty trained, so she never, got potty trained. She used those puppy pads. But even when she would, go in the room to use the puppy pads, she didn't always make it, or she didn't always urinate or shit on the puppy pads. Sometimes it was to the side. And she had a lot of health problems, and oftentimes I was the one driving her places to go get health checks and all that garbage. And every time I would complain and say, "I really don't want to do this," my mom would just be like, "Get over it and do it." Not my dog. It was the dog my mom got my perfect little sister for doing chores for a week. And now here I am driving it to the doggy ophthalmologist, or driving it to the vet, or going and buying more puppy pads, or cleaning up the shit. Or she also had this dog food, and they would put plastic spoons around the house, they meaning my parents, with just dog food on it so that the dog could find, I don't know why they did that, but I think they did it, okay, so I think my parents did it because she was really small, so she wouldn't eat a whole can of dog food at once. They would scoop the dog food out with the spoon and put it in her dog bowl, and they would just leave the spoon in there instead of throwing it away because it was really sticky, so I guess there was always food stuck on there. Well, my parents liked to use clear plastic spoons, so I would oftentimes twist my ankle on those spoons. Oh, it's infuriating. It is just really upsetting. Um, when I think about my abuse and I think about my mental health problems, being in a mental hospital 6 times, 6 mental hospitals, and it's a huge relief now that the dog is dead. I mean, it sounds so awful. I feel sorry for the dog. I feel sorry for the people who loved the dog. But I just never have to see it again. And every time I go to my parents' house, I won't be reminded of the abuse I suffered in the troubled teen industry. Editing Amanda here. Something really crazy happened with the video after that, where it somehow, like, for some reason sped up and I sound like I don't know what happened. I don't know. So basically all I said was that I am not that bad of a person, and I do have friends who knew me from before, like they've seen me at my worst, and other than dying in a mass shooting, my biggest fear is someone I care about seeing me at my worst and just abandoning me. So that's why I have friends who I've met like more recently who've never seen me have a mental breakdown, and I keep them kind of at an arm's length. So that's my story of abuse and why I'm glad my dog died. And I'm sorry that the ending got messed up. I really don't know what happened. So recently my guinea pig, who you saw, had pneumonia. He's pretty much fully recovered now, and I do still have a GoFundMe to help out with vet bills, and thank you so much to everyone who's donated. I've gotten a lot of donations. So I will link that down in the description, and just remember, if you've suffered abuse and if you have a mental illness, you will always be more than your illness. Your mind matters, and I love you guys. So that's it for me. See ya.